Man is on a quest to play God, to control the weather and use it as a weapon. Lightning, torrential rains, hurricanes, targeted at the enemy.
The ultimate war is if you never have to fire a round and nobody ever knew you launched the fight.
Is it possible there have already been attacks using weather weapons?
Some people believe that Katrina was weather warfare at its most potent.
But how do we get from understanding extreme weather to making it do our bidding?
Earthquakes, tidal waves, those become the future of warfare.
This series investigates how the impossible is becoming possible and what it might mean in the future.
If an enemy could change the jet stream over North America, it could plunge North America into an ice age.
July 11th, 2008. Lightning researcher Alyssa Eastvedt is crouched down in an underground bunker at the top of the Magdalena Mountains west of Socorro, New Mexico.
I'm in an underground room. My ceiling is at the ground level of the top of the mountain.
Her mission: trigger and direct lightning strikes to a target of her choosing.
The goal with these triggered lightning experiments is really trying to find out what starts lightning. There's a lot we don't understand about lightning, and one of the biggest questions is how does it get started? What's the initiation process? There's a lot that we do understand about what happens during the lightning flash, but how it gets started is still a complete mystery.
Lightning is produced in thunderstorms when liquid ice particles collide, building up large electrical fields in the clouds. But what actually triggers it is a mystery. Alyssa's experiment is off limits to film and video. She's in a protective underground chamber shielded by layers of rock. Above her is a rocket she'll launch into the storm clouds. It's attached to a wire nearly 1 mile long, anchored to the ground. As storm clouds gather, Alyssa will become the target.
You're trying to intercept a lightning bolt that's going to happen anyway. You're watching your monitors to make sure the cloud conditions are right for a lightning bolt to strike somewhere near you. And then you want to get your rocket up in the air so that that lightning bolt decides to strike your rocket and come to your instruments instead of striking somewhere else around you.
Alyssa launches rocket after rocket, hoping for a bite.
Triggering lightning really is a lot like winning the lottery. You can set up all the conditions right, and you can do everything to the exact time that you hope is right, and you can still be wrong.
Finally, at 3:23 p.m., on the 6th launch, it happens. These are the actual images. Lightning strikes the rocket. Millions of volts of electricity pulse through the wire to a ground target which measures data.
In the video, when the lightning flash is showing there, you can see a bright straight segment. And that bright straight segment is the wire from my rocket. So the rocket is basically at the top of that wire segment. And above that, you have the rest of the lightning bolt.
Now imagine if this was a battlefield, and that target was an enemy tank. A rocket could be sent up over that tank with a dangling wire, which could direct a lightning strike right into it. Alyssa is doing lightning research for the New Mexico Institute of Mining and Technology's Langmuir Laboratory, with no intended military application. But once we know how to trigger lightning, weaponizing may not be far off.
Lightning would be a devastating weapon to be able to bring into the modern battlefield.
Among the deadliest natural phenomenon known to man, a single lightning bolt can stretch over 5 miles and top 50,000 degrees Fahrenheit, the equivalent of 5 suns.
On the one hand, I mean, it could certainly kill large numbers of troops, but far more importantly, it could short out the sensitive electronic systems that lie at the heart of much of modern weaponry. Lightning strikes could take out radar systems, could render guidance systems inoperative, could interfere with all sorts of computer software.
It's harder to imagine a cooler weather weapon than the ability to be able to throw lightning bolts at your enemies like Zeus.
There are key barriers to overcome in order to weaponize lightning, torrential rains, even hurricanes. That's Impossible has assembled a to-do list. 1. An aggressor must be able to trigger the weather where and when it's needed. 2. There would need to be a way to target the weapon, like aiming a lightning bolt at an enemy installation. And 3. The technology would have to be plausibly deniable, which means it wouldn't show a fingerprint of who launched the strike. At the Nevada Lightning Lab, Greg Lay is also trying to find out what triggers lightning. And he's making his own lightning to find out. His office equipment, 2 towering Tesla coils that generate 19 million volts of electricity and temperatures of 11,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Lay built the lab to study the effects lightning has on airplanes, homes, and vehicles in the hopes of finding ways to make them safer in lightning storms.
Lightning is an electrical discharge from the cloud to the earth. Whenever the cloud builds up to a particular voltage, anywhere from 100 to 300 million volts, some mechanism initiates a discharge that travels from the cloud to the earth. It's a tremendous amount of instantaneous power. A single lightning strike during the strike would probably power the western United States, but only for a very short split second of time. The Nevada Lightning Lab is an effort to reproduce and study electrical anomalies that happen on a large scale. Our goal is to recreate about 300 feet of an actual lightning strike.
Lay will now demonstrate the power of his machine. Each time he turns it on, he hopes to get a step closer to understanding lightning's untamed fury.
It's totally safe as long as you stand in the right places. If you do the wrong thing, it can be very bad.
On go the coils, and the pressure of 19 million volts slowly builds in the air, just like lightning in a cloud. Imagine a spark plug which supplies an electrical charge to start a car's engine. The charged particles in the air slam together, igniting a spark, and a lightning bolt erupts. A small-scale model of what happens naturally outdoors. This experiment produces a 20-foot lightning bolt. Lay is building a lab where he'll someday be able to trigger lightning 10 times that size.
For centuries, people have dreamed about being able to control lightning. Hopefully, this will be the first practical attempt towards understanding how one might control lightning.
Although Greg Lay and Alyssa Eastvedt have no knowledge or interest in using lightning as a weapon of war, once scientists crack the code of what triggers lightning, the military will certainly use it. Triggering lightning, aiming the bolt, and doing it secretly. Some of the theory dates back 100 years to legendary electrical inventor Nikola Tesla.
Nikola Tesla can probably be regarded as the founding father of directed energy weapons, and as such may have laid the foundations for all sorts of weather modification and weather warfare strategies.
Nikola Tesla was an eccentric genius and was widely seen as the great rival to Thomas Edison.
Around 1891, Tesla invented the type of towering transformer coils still in use today to generate high-voltage currents for studying electricity. It was Tesla who developed alternating current, the electrical current that we use to power our homes and appliances. It was also Tesla who put man on his quest to control the weather. He developed a chilling theory for controlling the weather using extremely low-frequency waves, or ELF waves. If you've been to a rock concert and felt the low-frequency vibrations of the music pounding from the speakers, ELF waves are similar to that. ELF waves are low-level electrical currents that are discarded from electrical power lines, electrical wirings in our homes, even electrical equipment in our cars. These are normally emitted at levels so low that they won't harm you. Tesla theorized that if ELF waves could be beamed into the ionosphere, in the upper reaches of the atmosphere, man could change the course of weather. The ELF waves would create heat, altering the molecular structure of the ionosphere, pushing it out into space.
When you heat a certain region of the ionosphere, it literally pushes it up and creates what would look like a column of space, and the lower atmosphere then rushes in to fill that space, and as it does, it changes the flow of jet streams within the region, pressure systems, and in that respect, it could manipulate weather.
What this means is the heated ionosphere acts like a giant dam, rerouting the path of the jet stream. The jet stream flows between 6 and 9 miles above the Earth's surface and reaches speeds up to 300 miles per hour.
The jet stream is a focused, high-velocity rope of air that moves billions of gallons of water around our world, like a giant river at 50, 60,000 feet up. It moves all the water around our world for rain, for storms. This is the lifeblood of planet Earth.
Could Tesla's theories help create a new generation of covert weather weapons?
It was the Russians that were creating this signal.
Perhaps it's already here. Has the United States already been attacked by a weather weapon? July 1976. Strange, unexplained blackouts in worldwide communications plagued the globe. Ham radio operators all over the U.S. are picking up seemingly random, unknown radio signals. It's causing static interference with radio, television, and even telephone transmissions all across North America.
This signal was a tapping that would go for like 10 beats and then stop for a bit, and 10 beats and stop for a bit.
U.S. scientists discovered the cryptic signal is coming from the Soviet Union. They assign it an innocuous name.
It was called the Russian woodpecker because it was the Russians that were creating this signal, and the sound that the ham operators heard was essentially that sort of clicking, pecking sound.
Here is an actual tape recording of the mysterious signal. Satellite photos reveal the Russians have secretly constructed a gigantic radio transmitter and are covertly transmitting extremely low-frequency waves, otherwise known as ELF waves, into the atmosphere over North America. The Russians would continue beaming this signal until at least 1989, the last time they were detected. But why?
The way the woodpecker worked was that you had a very large radar that was pumping out millions and millions of watts of radio frequency energy. And that tick, 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 tick was each time a pulse was sent out. And in each one of those pulses, there was a tremendous amount of energy. What they were trying to do is to see our ballistic missiles coming up into space and on their way into the Soviet Union.
An over-the-horizon radar system meant to provide Russia with an early warning of U.S. missile launches is one possible explanation. But other researchers around the world now suspect something more sinister was at play.
At the times that the signal was coming through, there were some very bizarre things taking place.
In 1982, a report by Pentagon researcher L. Ponte alleges the Russian woodpecker signal is actually creating layers of artificial ionization in the upper atmosphere, which means it could have been bending the jet stream and altering global wind patterns, just as Nikola Tesla had theorized nearly 100 years earlier.
There's been a lot of research in military labs over what you can do with putting radio waves into the atmosphere and changing the dynamics of the atmosphere. And some of the research indicates that one can move the jet stream around and thus induce weather conditions.
Was the woodpecker yet another Cold War weapon directed at the U.S.? Turns out while the woodpecker was in operation, something very strange began happening. From 1987 through 1992, California experienced the most severe drought in the state's history. crops and livestock were dying. Food prices were escalating. People were terrified. Scientists were baffled.
Growing up in Northern California, I remember this drought very well. I remember just how scared everybody was because of how dry it was, how low the humidity was, and how easy the fires were started. It was scary.
Some researchers believe the cause of California's drought was a mysteriously stalled high-pressure system 800 miles off the state's coast, blocking the usual flow of moist Pacific air from coming ashore. An extremely unusual atmospheric anomaly. This is the jet stream in the early 1980s. High-altitude winds gently pushing moisture towards the southwestern coast of the United States. The arrows indicate winds blowing in an easterly direction. But according to NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, between the years of 1988 and 1992, during the California drought, an anomaly occurs in the jet stream. The winds appear to change direction, blowing east to west instead of west to east, indicating the jet stream coming into the west is suddenly much weaker than normal, causing a drought. By 1995, the jet stream returns to normal. The Soviets deny any involvement in weather warfare. Still, believers feel the denial is not surprising. In fact, it's expected.
One of the significant elements of weather warfare is the plausible deniability angle to it. You can't really attribute it to anyone at all because you don't know if it's just the weather or if it's some more sinister military application that you're being subjected to.
If you can trigger nature to do the work for you, you can raise covert wars, which our country and many others are famous for, and yet have the deniability that goes along with it.
Weather experts from NOAA and from the National Weather Service can't explain why the jet stream anomaly occurred. Perhaps it's all just a part of Mother Nature's unpredictable ebbs and flows. Still, it's no coincidence that the United States began building its own mysterious array of antennas in February 1992. They are located in Gakona, Alaska. The project is called HARP.
HARP is the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Project, originally a joint effort of the Air Force and Navy in cooperation with a number of academic institutions.
It is today the world's largest radio broadcasting station, but it's not designed to broadcast for human ears. It uses a unique patented ability to focus the energy coming out of the antenna field and injects that energy into a spot at the very top of the atmosphere in a region called the ionosphere.
HARP is comprised of 180 antennas, approximately 72 feet tall, linked together to function as one giant steerable antenna. Steerable because it can aim millions of watts of ELF waves into one tiny patch of the atmosphere.
The amount of energy we're talking about here is 3.6 million watts. To give you an idea of what that is, the largest legal AM radio station in North America is 50,000 watts. HARP is 72,000 50,000 watt radio stations injecting their entire output into a spot that's about 12 miles across by about 2.5 miles deep by about 90 miles up.
This is where HARP is pointing. It's an area located roughly 300 miles from Anchorage. The U.S. military says HARP is merely being used to study the physical and electrical properties and behavior of the ionosphere for both civilian and defense purposes. But another theory has surfaced. The intense energy being beamed into the sky by HARP is actually heating up the atmosphere, causing weather changes.
HARP is being used for weather modification. The military's own record proves it. They've admitted it within their own documents, and yet they still deny it to the public.
Dr. Brooks Agnew has researched ELF wave technology for the past 30 years and is convinced HARP's effect on the ionosphere does alter the weather.
HARP couldn't affect the jet stream directly, but indirectly it could, because if you push the ionosphere out into space, then the stratosphere just under the ionosphere has to move to fill in that gap. When it moves, it could pull the jet stream with it, thus rerouting it hundreds of miles, changing the way water moves through our atmosphere.
Dr. Agnew has devised a demonstration to show how HAARP could manipulate the atmosphere.
So what we've done is we've got a cloud generator up here. It's an ultrasonic nebulizer. It's going to create real water particles, just like you would find in a cloud. What we're seeing now is we're actually filling this chamber with microscopic water particles. You can see that it's almost completely filled with water vapor. It's beginning to condense a little bit on the sides, just so that you can see the detail. We've got a nice dense fog, just like you were sitting inside a cloud at 50,000 feet.
At the bottom of the cloud chamber, Dr. Agnew has constructed an ELF wave transmitter, a miniature version of HAARP.
We're only using 100 watts. It's perfectly safe.
When Dr. Agnew turns on the ELF wave transmitter and begins shooting ELF waves into the simulated cloud, the cloud begins to move up to the top of the chamber, taking the moisture with it.
If you get down low enough, you can actually see a clear layer above the antenna. It is actually pushing these water particles up, and that's exactly how HAARP works. What we've done is we've not only pushed the cloud off of the HAARP antenna, but as you can see, our cloud is almost completely gone inside. HAARP does exactly the same thing. It ionizes the particles, pushes them out into space.
HAARP is one of several ELF wave transmitters located all over the globe. The United States owns and operates 3 of them, one in Gacona, Alaska, another in Fairbanks, Alaska, and one in Arecibo, Puerto Rico. Russia has one in Vasilursky near Nizhny Novgorod, and the European Union has one near Tromsø in Norway. Working in tandem, these transmitters could potentially alter the weather anywhere in the world, changing the jet stream's course entirely, triggering massive rainstorms or droughts. Even hurricane steering would be possible by heating up the atmosphere and building up high-pressure domes that could deflect or change the course of hurricanes. The U.S. government is firm in its position that HAARP is just an atmospheric research facility. But is it more than coincidence that since going online, some experts have reported strange weather anomalies, including massive floods, hurricanes, and earthquakes? HAARP went online in 1994, and construction continued until 2007. There are reportedly a total of 5 known ionospheric heaters, including HAARP, in the world today. There are possibly 20 other ionospheric heaters in existence all over the world. There is no conclusive proof that any of them are being used as weather weapons, though they do have the ability to manipulate the ionosphere. And that brings us to something else. December 2001. Scientists at NASA's Ames Research Center in Palo Alto, California make a discovery. In studying more than 100 earthquakes with magnitudes of 5.0 or greater, they find that almost all of them are preceded by electrical disturbances in the ionosphere. Could there be a connection to HAARP or a facility like it?
To say that HAARP can artificially excite the ionosphere in such a way to cause an earthquake, well, it alarms me.
Dr. Agnew experienced the power of ELF waves firsthand back in the 1980s. He was hired by an energy company to locate oil and gas using the same kind of ELF waves at much lower frequencies to carry out his search. It's a process called Earth tomography. But during one particular incident, Dr. Agnew believes his use of HAARP-like ELF waves accidentally triggered an earthquake.
It was in the spring of 1987 we arrived in Roseburg, Oregon to use our ELF technology to search for oil and gas. Setting up that day, we had a little bit different results than we expected because the instant that we energized it, there was between a 4 and 4.5 on the Richter scale earthquake that occurred. We were so amazed about what seemed to be cause and effect. We get to an area that has a high propensity for earthquakes, in an area known as the megathrust of the Pacific Northwest. We turn it on and an earthquake occurs.
Dr. Agnew demonstrates how he may have triggered the quake.
This is a scale model of what the area looked like in Oregon when we scanned for oil and gas in 1987. This strata right here represents the megathrust area underneath the ground. The rock represents the potential energy set up in the ground from a tectonic stress. What we're going to do is introduce ELF waves and demonstrate that it can in fact trigger an earthquake.
In this case, Dr. Agnew is using a stereo speaker to produce the ELF waves needed for his demonstration.
ELF waves, extremely low frequency waves, are just like a subwoofer. In your car, you can actually feel the vibrations through your body. ELF waves are the same way. They vibrate the earth, and at right resonant frequencies, they can have devastating effects.
When the speaker is activated, ELF waves begin to emit. Tiny vibrations in the sand are detected. Then a few seconds later, the rock representing a fault line shifts.
As you can see, in a very few seconds, the resonant frequency built up in our model released the potential energy in the rock. That concussion, on a real scale, would have been felt for 100 miles. These conditions are already set up in the ground. All it takes is the activation energy to make the release happen. This is a small scale, and we're only using 30 watts in this scale.
When HAARP's broadcast array in Gakona, Alaska sends pulses of ELF waves into the ionosphere, the waves get reflected back down and pass through the earth and ocean. If 3.6 million watts of ELF waves were purposely or accidentally aimed at an already unstable fault line, it could, according to Dr. Agnew, cause a tremendous earthquake.
Looking at just simple instabilities, what does it take to create an avalanche? A guy walking across an unstable ice field. What does it take to trigger an earthquake? The right signal coming in when the pressures are already built up and they're at their threshold. That feather, and in our case that hammer, releases that energy.
Conspiracy theorists believe HAARP is responsible for triggering earthquakes in enemy territories, like Iran, China, and rogue parts of Afghanistan over the past 3 years. But HAARP's startling potential doesn't end there. Some say it's linked to a strange phenomena occurring in our skies. In recent years, peculiar cloud formations have been appearing in the skies all over the world with increasing frequency.
I think most of us in North America have wondered at these plumes crisscrossing the sky in grid patterns, parallel rows, and the now familiar X's. And many of us have wondered what these trails are.
While highly speculative, some researchers suggest these strange cloud formations are another agent of weather warfare. They first appear to be simply contrails, coming from high-flying jet airplanes. But these trails linger in the sky for many hours, some for even an entire day, forming an artificial cloud. Some researchers refer to them as chemtrails.
Chemtrails are deliberately sprayed by high-flying U.S. Air Force tankers, dispersing chemicals into the atmosphere.
Will Thomas has authored a book about chemtrails. Since the late 1990s, he has worked closely with another journalist in investigating these strange patterns that appear in the sky.
We have an FAA representative, in fact, a high government official, a person we came to call Deep Sky, attesting to the truth and the reality behind chemtrails. He described this program of spraying chemical trails at high altitudes in so-called commanded airspace, where commercial flights are routed around and beneath tanker airplanes belonging to the U.S. Air Force.
The theory is that chemtrails are being used in conjunction with HAARP. By spraying metal oxides into the air above enemy skies, then directing ELF waves from HAARP to heat those metal oxides, the temperature of the sky is raised to more than 100 degrees Fahrenheit, preventing the accumulation of water vapor that would otherwise form clouds and produce rainfall. The ELF waves HAARP produces bounce off the ionosphere and are able to curve around the Earth over the horizon to the ground, making any point on the globe well within reach.
One of the dangers in spreading chemtrails is that it acts as a desiccant and further dries the air. In other words, these chemical particulates can dry up the atmosphere and induce drought.
Imagine the effects of chemtrails on the battlefield, causing extended droughts in enemy countries, drying up their resources, forcing surrender. Just as terrifying is another form of weather being weaponized, rain, that can trigger devastating floods and wipe cities clean off the map.
If you can make it rain, you can have a profound effect on the battlefield.
One of the critical elements in launching a weatherized battle is being able to control rain and unleash floods.
The military have had a keen interest in the weather basically since day one. There have been a number of times the military have actually succeeded in developing technology to use the weather.
In history, there is a chilling example of a flood that may have been accidentally triggered with a weather weapon. August 15th, 1952, near the small town of Lynmouth, England, a massive rainstorm strikes. The river swells. Scores die.
It's estimated that 250 times as much rain fell in a period of 24 hours as normally fell in the entire month.
The East Lynn and West Lynn rivers flood their banks. According to the BBC, 90 million tons of water sweep down into the town of Lynmouth.
35 people were killed.
Bodies wash out to sea and are never found. Trees are uprooted, forming dams behind bridges, creating walls of water that carry huge boulders into the village, destroying shops, hotels, and homes. Was this just a freak act of nature? The prevailing theory is that it may have been a British military experiment gone bad, as they had been known to be conducting cloud seeding tests around that same time.
The British military would be experimenting with cloud seeding for the same reason as any government or military, because if you can control the weather, if you can make it rain, you can have a profound effect on the battlefield.
Allegedly, early on the morning of August 15th, 1952, some witnesses had reported seeing Royal Air Force jets flying in the area, at times disappearing from sight high above the cloud deck. Were they on a routine training mission? Or, as some people speculate, were they dumping payloads of silver iodide into the clouds? Silver iodide is one of the most common chemicals used for cloud seeding. It forces the tiny ice crystals that make up the cloud to fuse together. Once enough tiny ice crystals fuse together, they become heavy and fall to the earth in the form of rain. And on that fateful day in August of 1952, rain fell in record amounts. Did the Royal Air Force embark on daring cloud seeding experiments without the public's knowledge?
Some people reported seeing aircraft undertaking strange maneuvers, and it subsequently emerged that there was an experiment codenamed Operation Cumulus, which was indeed an attempt at weather modification. Interestingly, many of the documents relating to Operation Cumulus have disappeared and are not available from the National Archives.
Little over a decade later, the U.S. military conducted experiments to bring weather to the battlefield. October 1966. The Vietnam War is in full swing. U.S. military scientists are devising a way to slow down enemy forces using the weather.
U.S. had gone from advisor status to in-field combat status, and were not doing well. As a result of not being able to make progress on the ground, the U.S. went to bringing the battle into the atmosphere above the battlefield.
The Air Force employed a groundbreaking military directive called Project Popeye.
Project Popeye was a weather modification program that involved cloud seeding, and the idea was to produce or exaggerate the monsoon rains that are traditional in that region.
Experiments are carried out beforehand with the military aircraft dropping silver iodide crystals in clouds over a strip of the Laos Panhandle, east of the Bolovans Plateau in the Sekong River Valley. 50 cloud seeding runs are conducted. 82% of the clouds seeded produce rain within a brief period.
So Project Popeye then became Operation Popeye. It became a proper military program during the Vietnam War.
The goal of Operation Popeye was to extend the monsoon season and create an inordinate amount of rainfall by seeding clouds over the Ho Chi Minh Trail.
The Ho Chi Minh Trail was the primary supply route by which the North Vietnamese Army really supplied its troops that were operating in combat forces operating in South Vietnam, as well as supplying the Viet Cong. So it was the most significant logistical center of gravity to the North Vietnamese, and it was an important strategic objective for the United States and our ally South Vietnam to try to interdict that supply line to cut off those supplies to the enemy.
Operation Popeye's objectives are to soften road surfaces on the Ho Chi Minh Trail, cause landslides along roadways, and wash out river crossings.
The military had their own catchphrase as a result of this program, and it was "Make mud, not war."
They flew over 2,600 missions from a period of 1966 to 1972, and it's believed that it did exacerbate the amount of rainfall and probably extended the monsoon season by 30 to 45 days.
It had limited success. They did succeed in generating rain. They did succeed in turning the Viet Cong resupply route into a quagmire of mud. It didn't slow them down a bit. They were bringing the stuff in on bicycles and they just slogged through the mud.
Operation Popeye showed that weather can be brought to the battlefield as rain. But can it also be weaponized in the form of a hurricane? Some say it already has.
Some people believe that Katrina was weather warfare at its most potent.
Weather has been used on the battlefield with only limited success. But the technology is already here, paving the way for a bleak future once it's perfected. And some historians point to one haunting incident as proof. August 23rd, 2005. The National Weather Service is tracking an unassuming storm forming over the Bahamas. A storm this size rarely damages buildings or even takes lives. In fact, at this point, it's simply known as Tropical Depression 12. But that will change. It will unexpectedly grow into the mother of all storms, a Category 5 hurricane, with winds up to 175 miles per hour. It is named Hurricane Katrina. When Katrina slams into the Gulf Coast states, it will become one of the deadliest disasters in U.S. history, costing $81 billion in property damage and claiming more than 1,800 lives. Like other hurricanes of that year, Katrina showed some very peculiar movements never before seen in a major hurricane.
The 2005 hurricane season, there were some very amazing, strange anomalies. There were some things that should not have happened. One of the things was that many of the hurricane tracks were in almost straight lines, and hurricanes don't go in straight lines.
An ominous theory has surfaced that seems far-fetched.
There are some extremely sinister conspiracy theories circulating about Hurricane Katrina. Some people believe that Katrina hit where it hit with the power that it struck because of Russian or Chinese weather control experiments.
Just before coming on shore, Katrina did an abrupt 90-degree turn, hard left and went down the beach for a substantial distance before coming on shore. So we have speculations that our enemies had been throwing hurricanes at us. We were being bombarded, attacked with the weather.
So far, there has been no conclusive proof of such a conspiracy. Most attribute Katrina's path to the vagaries of a hurricane, but it does illustrate the potential of such a weapon.
To control and direct a hurricane gives you power at least equivalent to nuclear weapons. A hurricane could be the ultimate weapon of war.
The very next year after Katrina, something strange happened. According to the National Weather Service, not a single hurricane made landfall in 2006. Could the U.S. military be using HAARP to fend off hurricane attacks? An irregular high-pressure zone above the southeastern United States points to this conclusion, according to Jerry Smith.
This high-pressure dome has never existed before. It's never been seen to have a high-pressure dome parked over the southeastern United States for the entirety of a hurricane season. It's never happened before. And it's happened 3 years in a row now. This high-pressure dome worked like the rubber bumpers on a pinball machine, and every hurricane, like a pinball, hit it and bounced off, safely going back out to sea. The date coincidence of HAARP being completed and this buffer being in effect, I think, is very telling.
Meteorologists say the high-pressure area is just a weather anomaly, one of many that occurs in nature. But its intensity puzzles many meteorologists. Is this the same type of manufactured high-pressure system that experts feel hovered over California from 1988 to 1992? Today, nations still deny they are weaponizing weather, but there are suggestions to the contrary. This U.S. Air Force report graphically outlines the military's desire to exploit and manipulate the weather for the purposes of war by the year 2025. According to one of the most harrowing lines in this report, quote, "Weather modification is a force multiplier with tremendous power that could be exploited across the full spectrum of war-fighting environments."
The 2025 report on weather was essentially a military analysis of what could we do, whether it was to create rainfall, create drought conditions. The idea was by 2025 we would be able to manipulate virtually every aspect of weather.
It expressly states how and why the United States Air Force should own the weather. What technologies will be necessary to fight future wars using weather as a weapon.
The rationale for this is really the ultimate war is if you never have to fire a round and nobody ever knew you launched the fight. And this is what weather warfare offers militaries around the world.
With our deadline of 2025 quickly approaching, the future of weather warfare is cause for concern.
The worst case scenario is that satellite-based weapons systems will turn the Earth's weather on its head. It could rain in the desert and you could have a heat wave in the Arctic.
If an enemy could change the jet stream over North America, it could plunge North America into an ice age.
50 years from now, geophysical manipulation of the planet could be the weapon of war, where it's not bombs and bullets, it's earthquakes, it's tidal waves, manipulation of weather systems. Those become the future of warfare.
When we talk about weather warfare, we are talking about a death technology. This has nothing to do with enhancing life. The aim of weather warfare is catastrophic environmental destruction and horrific loss of life.
In the future, he who controls the weather will probably control the earth.